Welcome to the Dream Journal. From the studios of KSQD in Santa Cruz, the Dream Journal is a weekly show where we explore the power of nighttime dreams through conversations with dream experts and with you.
So there's no those vital minutes. Time is keenly found. We are not alone. Water over stone, even if you're by yourself. Even if you're by yourself.
In the words of Carl Jung, who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awaken. Today's music is called Villain Oxifer. So, have you ever felt better about yourself after telling someone your story? The healing power of storytelling. Today we speak with author and cult survivor Gerette Buglion, who guides others to tell their IGotOut stories in a process she calls writing to reckon. I am your host, Catherine Bell of Experiential Dreamwork, and welcome to the Dream Journal. The Dream Journal is also a weekly podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review. But most importantly, tell your friends, because we want to get you talking about dreams. And this is just one way to get you to find out who among your friend group is interested in dreaming. The archives are also available at Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and also at ksqd.org/the-dream-journal. All right, starting with my personal dream work. Oh my. What is it? Okay, so all of my music on stage dreams, I had another one with a twist to it, in that I have my clarinet. Talking about my clarinet, I have not played that thing for decades, and I played it in junior high, high school, and then the college marching band. And I have my clarinet, and I'm struggling to put it together, and I never get up on stage. The rest of the band is up there, I'm playing, and I never get there. And you know, it just makes me think that all these dreams about being on stage is kind of unraveling some of the awkwardness of me being a teenager, because I was really pretty unhappy as a teenager. During the times I was playing clarinet, I was an unhappy person. And so I think this dream is maybe touching into some of that comes up for me when I think about that time of my life. And you know, playing a clarinet is like any kind of music. It's an expression, and so it was something I just didn't have a lot of experience with. I didn't know how. I wasn't asked very much about what I needed to say, and it's just been a journey since then to learn how to connect to myself. So even the clarinet, the idea of the clarinet with the air moving through it's kind of a bit like a human body, perhaps. So I'm just mulling over this thing of struggling to get on stage and to join the band. All right, so I want to say hello to Gerette Buglion. So Gerette Buglion was born a middle child of 7. Well, I was the middle of 4, so there is a middle child thing. And she is a natural and lifelong educator. Today, she is Executive Director of IGotOut, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting survivors of cultic relationships. She is the author of An Everyday Cult and Writing to Reckon, which is a journal for survivors of religious, spiritual, and cultic abuse. And you can find Gerette at IGotOut.org, also GeretteBuglion.com, and I'll tell you how to spell that. It's GeretteBuglion, GeretteBuglion.com. And on social media, you'll be able to find her at hashtag IGotOut and hashtag EverydayCult. So hello, Gerette.
Hello there, Catherine.
There we go. Good. All right, Gerette, so glad to have you on the show. So this is
It
maybe.
is an honor.
Yeah, well, this is now your third appearance, and I love speaking to people who've already been on the show. It feels like we can go deeper right away, and you can take a look for some of those earlier shows on the webpage or on the streaming or the podcast platforms. And Everyday Cult is the name of Gerette's first book, and it describes her voyage and ultimate escape from a cult, which is based around dreaming. So there is our connection. But there is something about the cult and the idea of being sucked into something that we don't know how to get out of. We don't even realize that we're stuck in something like that. And I also just want to acknowledge that Gerette is calling from New England, which is currently severely flooded, and I want to make sure you're okay.
Oh, yes, thank you, Catherine. And I am grateful to be able to say that, yes, I am fine. My house is safe.
Good.
My family is safe.
Oh, gosh.
And, yes, continue to send thoughts and good vibes and resources to Vermont, because we're a little state, but we are hurting right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen some horrific pictures of Montpelier underwater and destroyed roads and things like that. So good. I'm glad you're okay. I want to actually start with an Instagram question that we got from Beth. And I think this really just encapsulates one of the things, the main things I want to talk to you about, because you have your book, Everyday Cult, and now you have a new book, Writing to Reckon, which is a journal for survivors of religious, spiritual, and cultic abuse. And it's a journal to help you write your own story. And when I posted this on social media, this is the question I got. What was your biggest motivation for telling your story, and what were your hopes for it in the world?
That's a beautiful question. And motivation is such an interesting thing. My experience with writing an Everyday Cult is that in a certain way, it's a story that had to be told. I felt like both a personal need to tell it, and whenever I shared in the years before I started writing, whenever I shared my experience with others, very often there would be this incredible relatability with people who would either share with me about their own experience of being involved in some sort of a controlling relationship, whether it was one-on-one or religious or spiritual or political or economic, a business group. And so there was this, because I kept meeting this resonance with other people and recognizing that I had been involved in something for 18 years that I did not know was unhealthy for me.
Right. That's the scary thing, is that you were so deeply involved in. I've been in relationships that in retrospect it was like, wow, that was controlling. But in the moment we don't always know.
Well, if we're still involved and it's controlling, we likely do not know. And so I became very interested in the very complex process that we all are, vulnerable to in one way or another. So I felt a need to share with others how it is that our natural human tendencies can become hijacked by things that can really appear to be really good ideas. And the writing process itself is something that is a process that can help us to reclaim and get in touch with our authentic voice. So the writing, when that question about the motivation, it was certainly a hope to help others, but it was also very much that personal process for myself to really articulate what it is that I experienced and to try to do it in a way that would be accessible and relatable to others.
Right. Because, it's one thing, we all have our private journals where we can write down all kinds of thoughts and words, but it's another thing to publish it and to put it out into the world. And even just publishing is huge, but there's even just sharing it with one other person can be incredibly vulnerable. So what was that process like for you as you started to share this, and what has your experience been with other people and helping other people bring their stories out?
Yeah, it is such an honor to now, be in the position where I do support others who have gone through, similar challenges to what I went through, to get their story out. And, the process is incredibly life-affirming. Mm. And a lot of people talk about it, or, will say to me, "Oh, you're so courageous, you're so courageous." Yeah. And for me, it really is not about courage as much as, like, having my feet on the ground and saying, this is who I am now today. Mm. And this is what I went through. Mm. Like, this is the reality. And it doesn't, yes, there are certain aspects of it that are scary, and there can be all intense, wide variety of, kind of personal attacks. The inner voices that say, "Oh, you're a charlatan yourself," to think that you've got a story to share. Why would anybody else be interested? Or there can be these intense shame attacks, that, oh, how could I have been so ridiculous, so blind that I couldn't see what I was involved in, and the impulse to hide that. And, there's many, many different responses that can happen. And yet, what I've witnessed again and again through the classes as well as individual work that I do with people is that when we just take a few breaths, and stand in our own story and own it, that something begins to shift. So we own it, we begin to find the words, and once we begin finding ways to express, to voice our lived experience, like, we're the only one, like, I'm the only one that knows what I lived through. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And if, like, someone else can't tell my story. Yes. And yes, there's all kinds of stuff and important research that's been done about memory. And that I think is important to kind of be aware of, and how our minds can be tricked.
Well, Gerette, I want to get into some of those things about our minds being tricked, but let me invite you to tell the listeners a little bit about your Writing to Reckon classes, because you really have some experience with helping people write out their narratives, and maybe tell people about how, what the classes are, how many people have been in them over the years, and just sort of a little bit of that background, if that's okay to share.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, Writing to Reckon is our ongoing classes that I've been just kind of blown away by the response to. It's a very simple format, where I hold space for a small group, usually 5 people or less come to each class. Mm-hmm. And they're all on Zoom, of course. Everything's on Zoom. Yes. The whole world's on Zoom these days. Yeah. That's not totally true.
No, I know what you mean.
Yeah. So, and we begin with a little bit of education. The theme for the Writing to Reckon classes are that everyone who's been in the class has experienced some form of power over abuse. Mm-hmm. Whether it's in an intimate relationship or, like I said earlier, in any one of the many different kinds of groups, spiritual or commercial, etc. Mm-hmm. So we've all experienced that kind of betrayal or hijacking of our own autonomy. And so there's a little bit of an educational piece, like literally 3-5 minutes. And then we have a writing prompt.
Mm-hmm.
So I offer a writing prompt, and then we have a nice chunk of time to write, anywhere from 40 minutes to an hour. And then there's an opportunity for sharing. And then after the sharing, there's an opportunity to offer feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And that feedback is all done in a very absolutely all positive, like what it is that we loved or touched us about any of the other participants' writing.
Mm-hmm.
And the simplicity of this holding space, there's something extraordinary that happens. Like when we're in a space where we know that others are writing,
Mm-hmm.
and we know that it's a safe space, we know that we're not going to be judged, we know that we're not striving for perfection, that really what we're doing is uncovering our voice, opening up our voice.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this beautiful thing that happens, like as we kind of, like even in one individual class, there's an opening of freedom that happens.
Mm.
And when the classes, when people stay and, return more and more, there's also this beautiful, unexpected gift, which is the writing improves.
Mm.
So by hearing other people's writing, when I was working on my book, I had a book coach, who said to me in the very first time we met, how important it is to read.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh yeah, I kind of forget. Like I'm so busy, I can forget about reading. But reading memoir, taking in other people's stories, is so helpful. Mm-hmm. Because we get to take in the way that they communicate a certain experience or an idea, and that informs and enriches our own writing.
Absolutely, yeah, right. And so these people, these stories that get written, I imagine that mostly they're for the satisfaction of the writer, but some of these are published on the IGotOut.org webpage, isn't that right? Some of these stories?
Oh, yes.
Uh-huh.
Many of these stories are published and so they're like an I Got Out statement. And that's something that's available to anybody who has gotten out, who was part of something that they once believed was healthy and vibrant and good in some way, that they were getting some benefit, and they kind of woke up from that experience and said, holy moly, that's not what I thought it was.
Right.
And got out of Dodge.
Mm-hmm.
So anyone who has had that kind of experience is more than welcome, is invited to share it through the I Got Out platform. Mm-hmm. And there's lots of guidance and information on the website. And then there are also classes that one can take, an individual free class that one can take to write their statement.
Okay. So in your experience, like what is the, what are the pros and cons of sharing your story with other people? Because you could just keep it for yourself and for your little writing group who are, nobody who's personal in your life. But then you also could share it with loved ones. You could share it with family and or larger communities. And what is the pros and cons of sharing such a story?
It's really, I would say, almost more than pros and cons.
Yeah.
I think of it as if there is a desire in you to share your story with a wider audience, that's something to listen to. That's like a voice. Like, I'm working, I'm thinking of someone right now who has just, since she was a child, said, I want to write a book. I'm going to write a book someday. And if you as we, as we grow up, I don't know, I'm 62 right now. So, getting to that, getting to, as we age, if we have that kind of like, oh, this is something I want to do, just seize the moment. Like it's something to give voice to, because that means there's something there. And for others who don't necessarily have that desire or impulse, their story, I guess I want to say this directly to people who don't have an impulse to publish a book,
Right.
that your story is still really important.
Mm-hmm.
Especially the parts of your story that involve confusion or trauma or complexity. Like those stories, when we can articulate them, when we can find a way to express them, be it through writing or even, through movement or music or dance or, whatever way stories are expressed, it's all integrative. I can tell you, Catherine, that after being, in this controlling group that I was involved in for 18 years, when I got out, I was looking at, in my first year, I recognized that I needed help, and I needed a therapist. I needed a therapist that was outside of the system that I had been involved in.
Mm-hmm.
At first, I tried to work with people within the system, and it helped in some ways, but it was the same system.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I needed to step out of that. And in stepping out of it, I had learned about the work of Dr. Dan Siegel.
Ah.
And his work he's a kind of a neuroscientist psychologist. He's very focused on neuroscience. And he wrote a number of books, The Neurobiology of We, and, there's a whole bunch of them. I can't think of the names right now, but the concept that I learned of his work that resonated so deeply with me right away is what he calls creating a coherent narrative.
Okay.
So whenever we've had trauma, whenever we've had a really challenging situation, we can, if we give ourselves the time and space to enter back into that experience and find coherence where there was trauma or confusion, we become more integrated. And that process of writing, that process of telling our story, whether, like you said already, Catherine, whether it's like speaking to one person, to a loved one and sharing it with a loved one, or if it's publishing a book, or if it's doing a podcast, or whatever it is, that process of communication is integrative.
Yeah.
And there is a different level of integration. It's a different neurological process that occurs when we write compared to when we speak. And same with when we move or when we connect with music. So ideally, we get to explore our story in all different kinds of ways, and all of it supports our integration of the traumatic experience. And when that traumatic experience is integrated, we can move forward into our life more freely.
So
does that make sense?
Yeah. So it's like framing the experience, like you say, creating a coherent narrative, like a way of kind of making it, telling a story about it in a healthy way. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, it's not so much telling a story as uncovering the coherence that was there before the event. And then by revisiting the events we actually get to say, oh, I now understand why I was there at that time and place.
Okay.
Even though I didn't choose that situation, I understand why I was there, and I now understand why I was impacted by it.
And that maybe this is some of the vulnerabilities, like you talked about at the beginning, that these things happen because of people's innate and natural urges, human tendencies,
Right. Yeah.
and so
Right.
that's so to bring in a tenderness for the self instead of shame for getting involved in such a situation.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. Yes. So kind of finding the authentic self through expression, through creative expression, and it is an option. Like, it's an option to stay quiet.
Right.
And for many people, not telling a story, can be really important. It actually can literally save their life.
Yes.
So that's very important to listen to.
Okay.
And what happens for many, I would say the majority of people who are not in a life-threatening situation or relationship of danger, there can be an overall feeling that something is dangerous when it's maybe not quite as dangerous as we think. And by going through the process of writing, whether or not it's ever shared, that helps us to own our story.
Right.
It helps us to say, this is what I saw, this is what I felt, this is how it impacted me. And by articulating that, we own ourselves more fully.
Okay.
Rather than, because trauma, of course, can cause disassociation.
Right.
So rather than, kind of living a life pretending something didn't happen, we get to actually own it.
Right. So I want to say this is Gerette Buglion. We're talking about writing as storytelling as healing, and in particular around the IGotOut movement, IGotOut.org. And I'm going to be right back. I have a couple more topics I'm very interested in. I want to hear more about self-care while writing, how and why to be anonymous when telling your story, and I'd love to hear some of those writing prompts. But before we go to the break, I want to take a moment and let you, Gerette, tell us about your book launch on Zoom so that people can sign up for that, so they'll get noticed about your new book launch, this journal, which helps people write their own story. Maybe you could tell us how they can sign up for that.
Oh, beautiful. Thanks, Catherine. Yes, the Zoom book launch party will be on August 29th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. So I guess that would be 4 Pacific Time.
Yep.
That's a Tuesday. And on my website, or I'm not sure if I have that link on the Dream Journal podcast link or not, but there's a way to register both on my website and wherever you can find my work.
Okay, and
you will be able to find it.
Perfect, and that's Gerette Buglion, Gerette, 1 R 2 T's, Gerette Buglion, BUGLION.com, and you can sign up there. So this is the Dream Journal. You are listening to the Dream Journal. My name is Catherine Bell, and our guest today is Gerette Buglion, and we're talking about storytelling as a healing practice. So you're welcome to call 831-900-5773. You also can send an email to onair@ksqd.org. So, Gerette, I have some more questions to ask about your experiences here. And I guess the first thing to start with is self-care in writing. Like, what can we do to make sure that we're not just re-traumatizing ourselves, like going back into the story?
Beautiful question. I'm so glad you're asking this, Catherine, because it definitely can happen that writing can feel like, like ripping a wound off.
Yeah.
And one of the most, a couple of the practices that I, bring into and regularly remind people of in my classes is one of the most simple and helpful practices, which is as we write about challenging emotions, either pain, grief, anger, these when we know that our feelings are going to be stirred up, we want to invite our feelings. I often say, let your feelings splash onto the page. It's okay. Your feelings are invited. And if you get to the point that it's somehow overwhelming and it feels too much, to take your hand and put your hand on your belly and or on your chest.
Oh, wow.
And just take a couple deep breaths. And that simple process of hand on the belly or hand on the chest rebalances the parasympathetic nervous system and can help to settle the emotions so that they're not overwhelming. And that is one of my absolute favorite self-care practices.
How simple. Love it.
It's so simple. The simple power of our own hand on our own body. And that's something, that so often people, when they're writing about challenging stuff, it can be about a physical violation. So to bring yourself back into your own body, and to remind yourself that, okay, this is not happening now. Yeah. Right now, I'm sitting here in, wherever you're sitting, whether it's, on your bed or at your desk and it's safe, just kind of reminding yourself, this is not happening now, I am safe. And bringing that awareness in. The other thing is it can be really important to actually set a certain amount of time. Sometimes when people start writing, it's like, and this doesn't happen to everyone, but it does happen. If you happen to be one of these people, it can be really intense. Like, it's like the pen hits the page or the fingers dance on the keyboard and there's no stopping it. And it feels like you're on a train that is running out of control and there's no way to get off. And if but one of the ways to help with that, because that's not necessarily, it may or may not be a healthy experience. And I should have already mentioned that ideally, if you have an intention to do some writing about traumatic parts of your life, ideally you are already involved in therapy, that you have a place where you are getting help. So, ideally, that's an ideal context. And if that's the case, then a good therapist could help you to know whether or not, writing for, 2 hours solid is a healthy thing for you or not. If you're not sure, if there's any hesitation about that, I highly recommend setting a timer and saying, okay, I'm going to do a half hour of writing. And after I've written for a half hour, my little alarm goes off. And then I can choose, okay, am I going to keep going or not? And so and you can, that little pause, taking a pause, actually helps to integrate. It allows the writing to integrate even further.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like in that gap, in that quiet space,
Right.
that actually allows the nervous system to settle.
Right.
So we want to make sure that we're kind of settled. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And that just putting the hand on the heart is also seems like a way to help you settle. And
Right.
you know, to tune in to whether there really is a no, but even a maybe, like they say, maybe almost always means no. So if there's even a
Right.
maybe, then it might be time to stop and come back to it another time.
Yeah, and there's another piece too, that there's to hold the awareness that when we're writing, and we have to get up and walk around and get some water and all of that, that's all part of the writing process. It's all okay, because that activity of getting up and getting a glass of water is that kind of break too.
Right.
You know, that's important.
Okay.
So that's a few little tips.
Good. Okay. And we did talk already about shame versus tenderness. And so if there's like a lot of shame,
Yes.
we want to
Yeah.
slow down. And, you know, we all have urges we all want love and the connection with the divine and all these, and wealth and all these things that these groups offer and these people. And so it's not wrong to want love.
It is not wrong to want love.
Right.
It is so not wrong. In fact, it's right.
Right.
Part of how we are. It's a human need.
So,
Right.
so Gerette, there's one thing about writing in your own journal for your own, therapy and satisfaction. But then there comes a time when you want to maybe share it more widely. And I'm sure there's a lot of, techniques and also reasons about being anonymous. Like, what do you recommend?
Yeah.
I know that in your own book, you changed a lot of the facts of what happened to you because of, on the sake of anonymity. Like, why did you do that in particular? And then maybe I'll hear a little advice about how to do that.
Yeah, there's a number of different ways to be anonymous. The way that I chose, because my work is in, work in this space of cult recovery and education, it was really important to me to own my name. Mm-hmm. I did not want to have a pseudonym. And yet I also did not want to put myself at risk for potential litigation. Yes. And I also did not want to confuse or hurt inadvertently any of the people who were part of the group that I had been involved in. Mm-hmm. So, and the group kind of no longer exists. There are still kind of different threads still happening, mm-hmm. but it doesn't exist that way anymore. But nonetheless, I wanted to keep a kind of separation in a way, and this was like, for me, it was a healthy boundary, mm-hmm. To say, okay, I am not naming my ex-teacher, mm-hmm. or the group that I was a part of. And that was definitely a recommendation of the literary lawyer that I worked with, and I highly recommend that anyone who is considering publishing, having a manuscript reviewed by a good literary lawyer is very important. Mm-hmm. This, obviously people can also work under a pen name. Mm-hmm. That's another way of added protection. And for, especially when there's like a desire to tell the story, but you have perhaps loved ones who are still involved, mm-hmm. in the group that you've left, mm-hmm. that you no longer identify with, your parents or your children, right. or a spouse, mm-hmm. or people. Another person I'm thinking about right now who I work with has a mother who would be so, like, in absolute despair. Like, it would completely undo her to have her child's story come out into the world. Right. So kind of waiting until like having that protection. You can do it. I mean, some people go ahead and just like, I just have to do this. Mm-hmm. And I, no matter what. And that is also another way to do it. So there's a lot of complexity, a lot of nuance mm-hmm. in these choices, Catherine. Yeah. And I think it's very important for anyone who's considering publishing to slow it way down mm-hmm. and think through the impact. Mm-hmm. Because it's possible that putting a book out into the world or putting a story out into the world, even through social media or podcasting, can have impacts that you don't want.
Right.
And can actually create further harm.
Mm-hmm.
And because there's the option of, doing it anonymously, your voice doesn't have to be quiet. You can, or silent. Mm-hmm. You get to speak out, and you don't have to hurt people.
Right.
Or yourself, or put yourself in danger.
Mm. So certainly by telling a story anonymously, we can help other people in similar situations to recognize the danger they're in. But what about tangible results? I'm thinking like of the NXIVM cult, which was totally brought down by people telling their stories, and these kind of, that's a very dramatic case that a lot of people know about. But, what kind of tangible results do you think could come from this kind of sharing?
That's a great question, and absolutely, some people are whistleblowers and need to be whistleblowers, mm-hmm. and so the question of if you are considering being a whistleblower, it's very important, I think, to take an assessment of your capacity and your resources. Mm. To be a whistleblower means being in the spotlight. Mm-hmm. Do you have the resources? Do you have the emotional resources? Do you have the financial resources? Mm-hmm. Do you have the legal support to back you up?
Yeah.
How much evidence is there mm-hmm. that whatever it is you're whistleblowing about, is the evidence really conclusive? Or is it too fragmented? Mm-hmm. Is it too sketchy? Is it too risky? You have to do a thorough assessment of your risk. And if things, if things really line up for you to be a whistleblower, by all means, go for it.
Yeah.
Sarah Edmondson and her husband Nippy Ames are, beautiful examples of whistleblowers who have who went through a horrific experience with the NXIVM group that you just mentioned.
They did.
And they've really turned their life around through their whistleblowing, mm-hmm. and are now doing incredible advocacy work and helping so many people. Through their podcast, A Little Bit Culty, and that's not for everyone. Mm-hmm. It's a unique. My guess is, neither of them would have done it alone,
right.
Even as a couple. Mm-hmm. There was a small group. There were two primary couples, but also other people really involved in blowing that whistle. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm. Okay, so this is amazing. This is Gerette Buglion, and about IGotOut.org on the hashtag IGotOut movement, and your course called Writing to Reckon, which is offered on IGotOut webpage, has we've met for years, and so there must be many, many stories there. And how do I begin? Like, if I sit down to write about a difficult experience, it can be hard to know how to begin. You've mentioned something about writing prompts, and I wonder if you would share with us a few examples of what writing prompts you recommend for people to start out writing their story.
I love that question. How do I begin?
Yeah.
That is such a beautiful question. And before I answer the question about writing prompts, I want to mention something else that I don't want to forget, which is save your journals. So often when we've gone through a difficult experience, if you are a journaler, even if you have written some letters or just have fragments of paper or random notebooks or random slips of paper in your life, there can be a tendency to want to burn them or throw them out or just be done with it, get rid of them. They no longer serve me. And if you have even, the slightest inkling of wanting to do some reckoning and some writing, save your journals. Don't burn them.
Okay.
And the reason for that is actually twofold. One is that they can contain, even a little slip of paper can contain so much information. It can be kind of a little doorway into a memory that may have been, locked up or forgotten. And in addition to the content, the really important content that the journals hold, they also, and this is again something I learned through my literary lawyer, they also contain anecdotal evidence of what you went through should there ever be litigation. And it's very important to recognize the role that these journals can play if you were to be sued, if there were to be, say, a defamation of character, suit against you. So what I've done is I've gathered them all up. I have this box that I call, my CTL life, and I have it all sealed. Now it's all sealed up because I don't need it. But it stays, in a safe space in my house. And at some point, it will be really fun to burn it, but it's just not now, not yet. And I have a number of friends and writer friends who are, working without journals. And sometimes I'll just hear that lament, I can't believe I burned them all. So I just,
good advice.
while I was thinking of that, I just had to. I was kind of bursting to this is so important. If it can be prevented, great. And if they're already gone, so what?
Yeah.
If they're already gone, there are many ways of reclaiming, and I would say, by just putting pen to paper or fingers to keyboard, but also by connecting with people who you knew around the time of that trauma. Because so often, even somebody that's a distant relative, to have a conversation and say, I'm just exploring this particular point in my life, and there can be a jewel of information that can just help put together some of the pieces that could just never quite fit.
Okay.
So there's, you can do that, and as well as others. Sorry, you were asking about prompts.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
No, that's very valuable. But maybe just in the last minute or two here, why don't you throw out a couple writing prompts that people can use to get started?
writing prompts can work in truly wonderful ways. And what I will do is share with you one prompt that I have used again and again with people who want to write their hashtag IGotOut story. And that it's like literally like my favorite prompt. And it's a 3-part prompt. And the first part of it is 3 words, 4, I got out of ... And there you get to kind of define what it is that you're no longer a part of. So this is for people who got out of a controlling religion or cultic relationship. I got out of ...
Right.
The next part of the prompt is when I. And when I is about that moment or series of moments where you started to realize that what you were involved in is not what you signed up for, or not what was healthy for you. So it's like okay, and like that's the place where it can be like the light starts to come in,
Right.
like something that's like, oh wait, something's wrong here. This is not what I want. And that part of the prompt, the when I, is about that moment. And I think that's important to ground it in the sensory world, like the smells and sounds and sights of where you're around, of what was happening in that moment.
Okay.
And the other part of the prompt is and now.
Ooh, and now.
So what is it that's life? Yeah, like what is life now? So it's I got out of ... when I ... and now.
Fabulous. So Gerette, this is Gerette Buglion. Webpage is GeretteBuglion, maybe easier to remember, IGotOut.org. I wonder if you have just a final encouragement for everybody before we wrap up. I take it people can get in touch with you at either of those 2 web pages.
Yes,
okay.
For sure.
You have your book launch on the August 29th to sign up for, or Writing to Reckon classes also at IGotOut.org. And what about just 20 seconds of final encouragement?
Just write. However, just pick up the pen. It's like if you want to do yoga, you have to lay out the mat first. Just pick up the pen, open the computer, blank page, and just start.
Okay, just right.
And
I love
see
that.
what happens.
I like that. Just right.
happens.
WRITE and RIGHT. Just right.
That's right.
Gerette,
That's right.
it's a pleasure so much, Gerette. Take care. We'll talk again, I'm sure.
Oh, for sure. Thanks
right.
again.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye now. So thank you for listening. The Dream Journal is produced at the studios of KSQD in Santa Cruz, and it's live every Saturday at 10 a.m. Pacific at ksqd.org. The podcast is released on the Monday following the show. It keeps us growing when you subscribe, rate, and review. I am Catherine Bell. Find out about my dream coaching practice at experientialdreamwork.com. Email me at catherine@ksqd.org. That's KATHERINE@ksqd.org. You can follow Experiential Dreamwork on Facebook and Instagram to find out about upcoming shows. I'd like to thank Rick Kleffel, engineer and music creator, Tony Russimano, Eva Milady, and the intro music is Water Over Stones, and the outro music is Everything, both by Mood Science. Tomorrow morning when you wake up, take a minute to write down your dream and bring it to the next Dream Journal.